समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
The talks are now taking place in Pakistan, and I know there is, in some circles in India, a lot of consternation. In some, there is cynicism, skepticism. Some say, quite rightly, that every time Pakistan gets the center stage like this, ultimately ends up paying for it because they go for what is spectacular, but because the substance in their country's strength, comprehensive national power is not there, they are not able to get long-term benefit from it. However, they keep coming back in the center stage. How does that happen? How has it progressed from year to year, from decade to decade? And why does Pakistan remain despite so many setbacks? Last 10 years was Pakistan's period of setback. In fact, last 15 years, since 2011, when Osama bin Laden on 2nd of May 2011 was found in Abbottabad and was killed there by the Americans. Since then, for almost 15 years, there's been a freeze in Pakistan's relationship with America and by implication also with the West. But now they are back in. In fact, in 2018, Trump had put out a tweet saying that what has Pakistan given us but deceit and lies. And he said that we've given Pakistan $33 billion in aid and it's all gone waste. No more. He said that. And then now he's there, he's calling Pakistan's field marshal his favorite field marshal. Few facts that I'm going to share with you are basically to underline to you the fact that Pakistan, I know that India also at various points of time has said that we will isolate Pakistan or we will make Pakistan irrelevant. Pakistan goes into phases of irrelevance and isolation, as it did, say, between 1972 and 1979. But two things happen. One, other developments take place in the region that brings Pakistan back to relevance. And second, Pakistan never stops working at it. Just to give you a small example, in 1971, Pakistan lost the war. More than half its country was gone by way of population. It was not liked by anybody in the world at that point, except maybe the Chinese and the Americans. Who cares for a loser? And America itself went through some instability with the last Nixon years, Watergate, and then the arrival of Jimmy Carter, who was a pacifist, and he did not want Pakistan to move towards nuclear weapons. What did the Pakistanis do? Now, it's very, very easy to say that 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Americans wanted help to set up a coalition of the Mujahideen against the Soviets, and so Pakistan came handy. It did not happen just like that. That opportunity did not fall in Pakistan's lap. I will share with you an article written by American strategic scholars C. Christine Fair and Shumit Ganguly, which reminds you of something that we should always keep in mind and somehow in our debate is always forgotten. That 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan did not drop from the heaven as a gift for Pakistan. Pakistanis worked at it. They began working on the Afghan Mujahideen since 1974. People who became Mujahideen leaders, they were given refuge in Afghanistan from 1974 onwards, and ISI began running an operation against governments installed in Kabul at the behest of the Soviets. These were all Soviet puppet governments, you can say, or you can say these were all Soviet friendly governments. There were insurgencies going on against each of these governments, and these governments were very unstable. One after the other, they kept on getting toppled. In some cases, leaders were also assassinated. All of that operation was being masterminded by the ISI and the Pakistanis. All of this then finally led to the Soviet invasion because Soviets thought that their quote-unquote friends or their puppets, you can say, or their proxies, if you prefer to use that word, but basically Soviet-friendly socialist governments, They were threatened and they were going to fall. That government was going to fall, and the Mujahideen or the Islamists of that period, supported by the Pakistanis, were going to take over. That's when the Soviets invaded in 1979. That was their biggest strategic error, led to the end of the Soviet Union. And that brought the Americans in. I'm telling you this story just so we understand that Pakistanis worked at it. So, two things. One, geography. What is Pakistan's biggest strategic capital? Its biggest strategic capital is geography. Now, if you really Google what I've been writing seriously, you might even find my having written at some point that Pakistan has now lost its biggest strategic capital, which is geography. That was after the end of terrorism coming out of Afghanistan. That is once the Taliban took over. Biden washed his hands off it, and I said Pakistan has lost its strategic leverage, which is geography. And that leverage had come for decades because of what was happening in Afghanistan. First, because of the presence of the Soviets there, and then because of the terrorist organizations that were harbored there and were carrying out their operations for there. That was the era that we might describe as the peak days of the AfPak era. Now, the Americans knew that Pakistanis were supporting many of these groups, including the Taliban, and yet there is no way they could have fought Al-Qaeda without Pakistan's help. 2020, once Biden withdrew, then it looked like Pakistan had lost that leverage. That leverage has not come back. But what they lost in Afghanistan now has come back because of West Asia, because Pakistan is also a state next to West Asia. Pakistan is the last non-Arab or Persian country before the Persian Gulf begins. To that extent, Pakistan sits on the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Pakistan therefore has strategic capital number one is its geography, which Pakistan has rediscovered now. It was lost because of Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan had been Pakistan's strategic capital even before the Soviets invaded it. It was valuable to Pakistan because the Americans were interested in this. The Soviets always treated Afghanistan as their buffer state, and also a state through which they could expand into Asia. Because remember, all these Central Asian republics, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, all of these were Soviet republics within the USSR. So the Western power was always concerned that the Soviets could push beyond this. The British in their times had developed Afghanistan as their buffer state. But after they left, the Soviets came to take control of Afghanistan, and that's why the Americans thought that they needed a base next to Afghanistan, starting with Peshawar, to keep an eye and to at least make sure that the Soviets could not expand from there. In fact, that's how Pakistan's first security alliance with the Americans came in 1954. In 1954, the first Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement was signed, and then Pakistan became a member of SEATO, that is the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, supported by the Americans but generally directed at Southeast Asia. Its primary members to begin with were the Philippines and Thailand, because that is Southeast Asia. That's where the Western powers saw a rising communist threat. And then US, of course, US, UK, France, Australia, New Zealand, and an outside the region member, Pakistan. So Pakistan in 1955 joined SEATO. Later, another organization came up that was called Baghdad Pact. As the name indicates, this was set up in Baghdad in Iraq, and irony of ironies, at that point, both Iraq and Iran were its members as Western allies. Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Pakistan were all its members besides US and UK. So all four major Muslim states were members of Baghdad Pact, which later came to be known as CENTO, or Central Treaty Organization. These organizations continued in the 70s. SEATO died in 1973 and CENTO died sometime in 1977, both because differences arose over the Vietnam War, and once again, Pakistanis got disillusioned with the Americans because they thought the Americans did not help them during their war with India in 1965. And then in 1971, the Americans made many noises, but they did not quite help Pakistan. To understand how things move with these alliances, Baghdad Pact was renamed CENTO after Iraq pulled out, because Iraq then became friendlier with the Soviet Union. Cold War was in full swing and finally was dissolved in 1979 when Iran withdrew after the revolution there, because the slogan of the revolution was death to America, death to Israel. SEATO, on the other hand, began to disintegrate after the Vietnam War. Pakistan pulled out in 1973, also disillusioned. France pulled out in 1975, and in the course of time, this ceased to have any relevance. Now, that geographical advantage of Afghanistan, as we said to you in 2020, was gone. It is still gone. At this point, Pakistan's geographical advantage of Afghanistan has now become a liability. But Pakistan is also a neighbor of Iran. It shares a 909-kilometer border with Iran. It also sits on the mouth of the Persian Gulf. It also has a very large Muslim population, the second largest Muslim population in the world, estimated to be around 25 crores now, and also the largest army for a Muslim country in the world. In fact, a very large army, a very modern army, and frankly, the only army in a major Muslim country that's capable of absorbing modern technology and also following its officers' orders. All of these things give Pakistan unique strengths. That's why anytime Pakistan feels isolated and it goes through periods of isolation, either it does something or something happens by way of geography to bring it back into the center stage. Exactly something like that has happened now as well. In 1954, Pakistan was still not under military rule. That is when the two sides, the Americans and the Pakistanis, signed the Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement. Why did that happen? That happened because the Americans wanted a base in Peshawar. From that base, they wanted to launch their spy planes over the Soviet Union to keep an eye on what was going on there. This request was made by President Harry Truman, to Liaquat Ali Khan, who was the first Pakistan leader, prime minister then, to visit America in 1950. That was denied by Pakistan, but 1954, this was accepted. Americans then started carrying out spy plane operations from Peshawar Air Base. And it is from there that on May 1, Francis Gary Powers took off in a U-2 spy plane and was shot down over the Soviet Union. He was taken prisoner. Later, the following year, or maybe a couple of years later, I think in 1962, he was exchanged with America in a mutual spy swap. That was the time when the Soviets were getting really angry with the Pakistanis. It was also the time when the Pakistanis were really warming up to China. It was also the period when tensions had begun rising between China and the Soviet Union. It was also the period, no coincidence, that relationship was warming up between India and the Soviet Union. 1963 is when India signed up to buy the first MiG-21s, and that started a long period of military and strategic cooperation or ties which continues till today. The essential difference, however, was that in all the good phases, Pakistan was recipient of very high amounts of American aid. When they first signed their Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement in 1954, this was 1954, they were allocated a military assistance of $452 million. If you just did a calculation, what was $452 million in the 50s? Don't put a date, don't say 1954, so let it average out, give everybody the benefit of doubt, and ask what is the value today. The value of $452 million in the 50s today would be about $5.26 billion. It will be very serious money for defense spending today. That is the money that the Pakistanis got, and India then had to deal with that challenge as it was rising. The pretense was that all of this was given to build a bulwark against the spread of communism, but everybody knew where Pakistan was going to use these weapon systems, this training. Immediately after the first defense agreement between Pakistan and the US, training came in because the US had brought in its officers and its armed forces to set up the Military Assistance Advisory Group, MAAG, in Rawalpindi. So this is a relationship that goes so far back. However, it goes up and down because Americans also are cynical. They see utility in Pakistan when they need it. For example, they were not giving Pakistan any aid. Jimmy Carter had cut off everything except maybe some humanitarian aid and some continuing PL 480 food aid. But in 1979, as the Soviets came into Afghanistan, then the tap of aid reopened. In fact, initially Jimmy Carter offered Pakistan $325 million by way of aid, which Ziaul Haq very cheekily dismissed, you can say contemptuously and cheekily. He dismissed it as peanuts, and the pun wasn't lost on anybody because Jimmy Carter himself was a peanut farmer from Georgia. This lasted till 1988. Till 1988, Soviets withdrew, and then it became evident by 1989 that the Mujahideen will take over. By 1990, Mujahideen had taken over. That's when the Americans turned again, and suddenly they remembered that Pakistan was developing a nuclear weapon. And a report came up that they were a screwdriver turn away from making a nuclear weapon. That's when the Americans passed what is called as the Pressler Amendment. Pressler Amendment said that the US administration has to certify every year that Pakistan had not built a nuclear bomb or was not building a nuclear bomb before the next installment of aid was sent out. By 1990, that certification had stopped being given. And that is when, once again, the Pakistanis became the bad guys, also because they were not needed in Afghanistan. So, geography, that was Pakistan's capital, had now ceased to be so. And this carried on, for a long time. In 1999, over Kargil, for example, the entire Western world, particularly the US, sided with India. Bill Clinton, after that, came on a visit to India because the Pakistanis wanted to visit him. He went there, only stopped at the airport, gave a broadcast address without doing any public events or meeting anybody in public, left from the airport, wagged his finger and said, map of the subcontinent can no longer be redrawn in blood. That sanctified the line of control. That was a bad era for the Pakistanis. And then things turned dramatically again with 9/11. When 9/11 happened, initially the Pakistanis tried to say the usual. There are root causes why this has happened. And then we know the American Deputy Secretary of State, he threatened to bomb Pakistan to Stone Age. Favorite American line. They used that in Vietnam. Trump just used it for Iran. And before that, the Americans used it for Pakistan. In fact, that is something that Musharraf said to justify joining the US war on terror in Afghanistan. Within a week of 9/11, Pakistan had become a stalwart ally of the Americans once again. Again, why? Thanks to geography. So what happened? What shows this dramatic shift? On 1st of October 2001, a big bombing took place at the J&K assembly in Srinagar. Somebody drove a car laden with explosives in the assembly building, and that killed 38 people. This was a Jaish-e-Mohammed operation, and as later came out, this was a rehearsal or a dry run of sorts, if you can call it dry run when people die, with human bombers for the parliament attack that took place just about two months later. What happened when this attack on the assembly took place in Jammu and Kashmir? India made noise, India protested, but the Americans needed Pakistan right now. So what did Colin Powell, then Secretary of State, say? How did he describe this bombing of the J&K assembly? He said, there's been this attack on a Government of India facility, in Jammu and Kashmir. That is how far the Americans had tilted towards Pakistan because of their own need. Then Parliament attack took place and India began piling forces on the border under Op Parakram, and the Americans now panicked that if India starts a war at this end, that will take the Pakistanis away from the Afghan borders, and that they did not want. And that's how they, Tony Blair, all their allies started shuttle diplomacy flying into India and Pakistan to try and prevent a war, because they were more interested in the war. They were fighting in Afghanistan, where Pakistan was a partner. By 2011, with the killing of Osama bin Laden and with Americans being in reasonable control of Afghanistan, they thought they no longer needed Pakistan, and once again, Pakistan got isolated and abandoned. And now the crisis in the Middle East, the war in the Middle East, has once again brought Pakistan back in. Pakistan's geographical advantage has now gone beyond Afghanistan. Now, all such phases in Pakistan's history or all such highs in their history have for some time caused excitement. They've also brought in a lot of money. That money mostly has disappeared. It hasn't done much good to Pakistani economy, Pakistani society, and Pakistan's national strength. What will happen this time? I don't know. Nobody knows. It will depend entirely on how Pakistan use this advantage. If they use this advantage again to rebuild their military, to prepare for one more confrontation with India, that will result in one more setback for Pakistan, because Pakistan is in a very fragile state right now, economically and also in terms of its cohesion. But on the other hand, if they become sensible for now and think that, look, we've got an opportunity, this is redemption, we can do something, rebuild our nation, then they can do something with it. But for that, they will have to give up their notion of being in a permanent war with India, or of the idea that one day they will fight a decisive war against India and win it, or they are destined, that it's written that one day they will fight a decisive war against India and win it. If they can get rid of that notion, then this new phase can be of benefit to them. Otherwise, this might end up like all the other ones in the past.